I was on stage for about 55 minutes at this point. It's been going great. They've been laughing, they've been screaming, and I get to the conclusion of the show, this epic 10-minute piece of mind reading that I've been doing, and I go, and your card was the 2 of diamonds. And they said, no, that 55 minutes of goodwill was gone because the very, very last thing I did before leaving was mess up the trick. Welcome to the SpeakerPath. I'm Brian Miller, founder and principal consultant at Clarity Up.
I'm Francisco Mafuz, the story specialist at Clarity Up.
I'm Joanna Joksma, Joe for Friends, and I'm the presence and performance specialist at Clarity Up.
Have you ever wanted to speak, but you thought, I am just not entertaining enough to captivate this room? Well, what if I told you that you don't have to be an entertainer to be entertaining? Hi, I'm Brian Miller. I'm a former professional magician turned international keynote speaker. Today, I'm the founder and principal consultant at Clarity Up, where we teach smart people like you how to explain your big ideas to the rest of us. We've trained hundreds of speakers, dozens of viral TEDx talks, and in this video, I'm going to teach you how to be more entertaining, even if you're not an entertainer. So the first thing to understand is that engagement is entertainment. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about Hollywood, it is the staple of the entertainment industry here in the States. But the Academy Awards, to this day, still does not recognize comedies formally, which means essentially every award goes to dramas or comedies pretending to be dramas. What we learn from that is you don't have to be funny. You don't have to do magic. You don't have to do hypnosis or be a juggler or a singer or a ventriloquist to be entertaining. That if you have emotional and intellectual engagement, that in and of itself is entertainment. So you may not have one of those particular entertainment style skills in your background, but there are things that you can learn from entertainers to make your speeches more engaging, and if you make them more engaging, they will necessarily be more entertaining. Here are those 5 things. 1, the story is more important than the trick. This was a very hard lesson to learn as a magician when I was obsessed with sleight of hand. I was so engrossed in learning how to make my tricks incredibly complex and doing the most impressive sleight of hand that at the end of the day, what I was doing was building magic tricks that would only be interesting to a magician. But I wasn't performing for magicians. And then you realize that the most entertaining magicians are the ones who tell stories. In fact, it's been said, whoever tells the best story wins. So whatever point you have, whatever insight you want to make, whatever study or statistic or research or leadership lessons that you're bringing to the table as a speaker, you need to wrap them in a story. Now, the story doesn't need to be epic. You don't have to have climbed Everest or run 14 marathons in 3 days, or, you don't have to have gone through a traumatic situation as a child, as a war refugee, and then built a career. You don't have to. If you do, you can use those stories. But all you need is, as my lead consultant and story specialist Francisco says, you need a real life example that makes a point. If you can use a story to wrap the lesson in, it will be more engaging for your audience. And when we have an engaging story that grabs us emotionally, our speeches become more entertaining. And by the way, if you've got a study or a statistic that you want to share with the audience, one of the most engaging ways to do it is to tell the story of the study or the story of how the statistic came to be. Don't just give them the results of that study or the statistic itself. Tell them the story of how that statistic was discovered or how that study was created and what they were hoping to achieve, the hypothesis, how it went, and then the results, if they're surprising or unexpected, whatever it is. Telling the story of the study or of the statistic is another way to use story to be more engaging. For example, if I'm giving a talk on persuasive communication and I tell you that using the word because makes it more likely that someone will comply with your request, that's not that interesting. I mean, you're probably like, yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? But if instead I go, it's 1978, and a psychologist named Ellen Langer at Harvard decides to run an experiment. So she rounds up, now I'm not even gonna keep going from there, but you can see how immediately you are pulled in to find out, well, who is this woman and what was she studying and what was the experiment? And if I walk you through, here's what she was thinking, here's what she was testing, here's what happened, and here's the result that they weren't expecting, then I've pulled you in. And at the end of that, I can give you the result of the study. And even though it's the same takeaway for you, the audience, the way I packaged it around a story will make it more engaging, and therefore you will be entertained. By the way, look up the Xerox experiment by Ellen Langer. We'll leave a link in the show notes. It's bananas. The second insight from the world of magic are about first and last impressions. One of my early mentors as a magician told me, if you're gonna build a show, make sure that you open with your second best trick and close with your best trick. In other words, there's only two things that the audience will remember: the first thing you do and the last thing you do. As a speaker, the audience will really only remember the first thing you say and the last thing you say. All that stuff that you work so hard on in the middle is just gonna wash over them and just kind of become a vibe. But they will remember the opening, and even if they don't remember your opening, if you don't grab them with the opening, they won't stick around long enough to hear the last thing that you say. But the last thing you say, oh man, the recency bias is very powerful. We remember most vividly the last things that we hear, the last things we encounter, the most recent experiences that we have, we tend to recall. There was one time I was given a show in front of about 700 people at a college campus as a magician. I was on stage for about 55 minutes at this point. It's been going great. They've been laughing, they've been screaming, they've been jumping out of their chairs, and I get to the conclusion of the show, this epic 10-minute piece of mind reading that I've been doing, and I go, and your card was the 2 of diamonds. And they said, no. And that was it. That was the end of the show. That there was nowhere else to go. And so I literally had to go, oh, well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks so much for coming out. Everybody have a great night. And they kind of clapped, and I left the stage, and I realized that 55 minutes of goodwill, 55 minutes of laughter and cheering and excitement and engagement was wasted. It was gone because the very, very last thing I did before leaving was mess up the trick. So many speakers mess up the conclusion. They have a great talk all the way through, insightful, engaging, interesting, entertaining, the whole bit, and then they get to the end and they go, so I think that's the time I have. I guess I'll take some questions if anybody's got any. And it's wah, wah, wah. It just, the whole thing falls apart right at the end. No, you gotta make sure that the last thing you say is a mic drop. You need to write the final sentence or the final few sentences, memorize it cold, rehearse, just as strongly as you would rehearse your intro, if not more, and make sure that you hit that last thing and leave the stage. All right, the third insight, I call this the 40-minute slump. When I was a magician and I was around comedians and hypnotists and other magicians and entertainers, all of us knew about the 40-minute slump. That if you're on stage in front of a live audience for longer than 40 minutes, somewhere around that 35 to 40 minute mark, the audience's energy just dips. I don't know what it is. It's probably biological. I'm sure somebody out there would be able to tell me the biological mechanism at play here, but it doesn't matter how interesting or engaging or exciting the show has been, how good it's been, how much they love you. Somewhere around 40 minutes, they just have a dip in energy. And so great entertainers would always plan a bit. They would plan a piece for that time in the show, which was designed as a lighter piece that did not require much emotional or intellectual engagement. And because of that, it gave the audience a chance to just kind of sit back. Magicians, we'd often do a watch me piece at this point. Maybe you put on a piece of music and you levitate something. You just do something that just lets the audience just kind of watch and enjoy and just recapture their energy. You need them to reclaim their energy because you're gonna head into the conclusion. As a magician, the climax was gonna be big and crazy and heavy. As a speaker, you're gonna make your final point, your final story. You're gonna hit the stage and get off, whatever it is. You need them to have energy for that. And so remember that somewhere around that 35 or 40 minute mark, if you're a keynote speaker, you're on stage for a long time, their energy is gonna start to dip. And so plan accordingly. Insight number 4, always, always, always have a backup plan. Magicians call these outs. There are lots of ways that a magic trick can go wrong. You could be at the end of your show and go, was this your card? And they go, no. And if you have no plan for what to do in that situation, you are screwed, just like I was. And so what magicians learn to do, and I realized I needed to do after that moment, is we tend to have outs, different ways to get out of any given trick based on all the anticipated ways that it can go wrong. Now, how does this apply to a speaker? It's not as obvious. Well, as a speaker, you're going to use a lot of examples, stories, studies, interactive exercises, whatever it is. You've got lots of different pieces of supporting evidence for your points throughout your talk. They may not all land the way you expect them to for every single audience. If you've designed your speech really well, it should work like 95% of the time, no matter who you're in front of. But once in a while, you tell a story that you've told 100 times before, that has always worked, that has always landed, and it just doesn't quite hit this time. Or you use a metaphor or an analogy or an example that this particular audience, for whatever reason, just didn't quite click with. They didn't get it. You need to have a backup example for any of your key points, any of the key examples, metaphors, stories, any piece of supporting evidence that's really critical, that if the audience didn't get it, if they weren't fully on board, you could not actually make the argument or make your case. You need to have backup examples ready to go. This is where keeping like a story bank or a studies bank in your phone, in your notes app, is really useful. Anytime you hear a story or something happens to you, or you come across a statistic or a study that's related to the main points that you make, you can drop it into your notes app and then just tag it with which particular point or insight or takeaway that it supports. And so you always kind of just have other things ready to go. Very, very important. Make sure that you've got outs. And the fifth and final insight for this video from the world of magic for you as a speaker is the best ideas don't win. The clearest ideas win. Simplicity wins every time. It was almost always the simplest damn trick in my show that people wanted to talk about after. I would do crazy things with cards getting signed and flying into the air and changing color and pulling bunnies out of hats and then hats out of bunnies and cards out of hats and all kinds of crazy stuff. And the thing that people would come up after and go, oh, that thing you did where you made the silk vanish, that was nuts. I don't know how you do that. I've seen so many magicians do it. I never figure it out. And I go, that's a children's trick. I knew how to do that when I was 8. You probably knew how to do that when you were 8. But because it was simple, it was clear, it was able to stick, right? Whatever is clear and simple is sticky. And so remember that you're going to want to make incredibly complex points because you're an expert in your topic. You know this stuff inside and out. Don't overcomplicate it. I mean, know your audience. If you're a scientist talking to a room full of scientists who are just like you, who have the same level of experience with your topic, then yeah, you're gonna need to talk at a complex level. But we are almost never in those situations. Most speakers, even experts like scientists, are in situations where we're talking to people with a much lower level of understanding, if any at all, of our topic. And our job is to translate our expertise to them so that they can use it in their own lives. Make sure that you simplify, simplify, simplify. No matter how simple you think you've made it, it probably isn't simple enough. If you don't think it's obvious to the point of boring, it probably isn't simple enough. I'll leave you with this. As a very young magician, when I first got signed to an entertainment agency, the owner of the agency, who's still to this day my personal manager, Scott said to me before I did a major showcase where this is a big deal. I did not have bookings yet. I didn't have a career. I was barely scraping by, I couldn't even afford to feed myself. And I had an opportunity in front of a room full of buyers, people ready to write checks and bring me in to do magic at their event. And he said, hey, all the tricks that magicians would call hacky, that if other magicians, if your friends and colleagues in magic, if they saw you do it, they would say you're being a hack. He goes, those are the ones to do. Just do those tricks. And I ignored him. I was like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I know my show. I do complex, interesting, intellectually stimulating magic. and I bombed. I got no bookings because there wasn't a single person willing to write a check for somebody who was doing something that was so complex, so intellectual that their average audiences that they were bringing me into, they wouldn't be able to get it. They wouldn't enjoy it. And once I learned that very hard lesson and I started to simplify my act and make it more accessible, my bookings went up and up and up. So as a speaker, remember, complexity is working against you. It's not dumbing it down. It's making it clear, understandable, and relevant. So those are the 5 key insights from the world of magic that you can pull into speaking like I have. First, story over content. The story surrounding the insights is going to make it land. Second, the first and last impressions really, really matter. Make sure that the first thing you say and the last thing you say are incredibly important. Third, 40-minute slumps, somewhere around 35, 40 minutes, their energy is just going to dip. You got to watch out for that dip in energy, and if you're a professional, you got to plan for it. Fourth, always have a backup plan. Make sure that you've got outs, different ways to talk about something or explain it, or examples in case the one that you typically use doesn't land, doesn't work for whatever reason. And finally, when in doubt, just say the thing. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Brian Miller. Please do hit the like button. Leave us a comment. I will read absolutely all of them, respond to as many as I can. Subscribe to the SpeakerPath, and remember, ideas don't speak for themselves. People do.